Hi, my name is Kristen and this is Kristen Craves Books. Does anyone else feel like January was the longest month ever, but it also flew by? I feel like that happens to me every January, but it was a really good reading month for me. I read 12 books this month and found an all-time favorite. Last year, I read my favorite book of the year in January and have a feeling that might have happened this year as well, so it's a new trend for me. There's only one disappointment really, and I read 4,499 pages this month, which is really exciting, and I've just really been in the reading mood. It's a great way to start the year, so I'm thrilled about that. I hope that continues into February as well. So I will just dive right into it, and I'm just going to show you the books in the order that I read them. Sometimes I rank them, but there's so many 4 stars here, just some really good books. I couldn't put them in any sort of order, so it's just the order that I read them. So the first book that I read, and I put a lot of weight into the first book that I read in a year, and I was debating about this. I put up a poll on my blog and everything, but then I decided on A Certain Appeal by Vanessa King because I feel like this cover screams New Year's to me. I just get a New Year's Eve vibe from this, and I'm always up for a Pride and Prejudice retelling, and that is what this is. And it is Pride and Prejudice, but set in Manhattan at a burlesque club. So Elizabeth is a burlesque dancer. Well, she is, what do they call? I learned so much about the burlesque world while reading this, and I really came to appreciate that world and understood. I loved the way that Elizabeth talked about it and how it changed her life and the connection she made through there. So she is what is called a stage kitten. So she picks up everybody's clothing. She gives drinks at the burlesque shows. So that is her role. And then Mr. Darcy was a patron at this burlesque club. And we get so many of the characters from the original story, and here Jane is a character, and here he is a dancer, and then there's also obviously Charles, and their romance is so sweet. I loved it. And Wickham is in here. It's so well done. It has the feeling of the original story, but it's much more modern. And I loved the way this ended. It was a different ending than from the book, but I thought it was so satisfying. So this is a nice underrated book. This is Vanessa King's debut, so I hope that she continues to write more books. I really, really loved this. Then I read an e-arc of a book that comes out today, the day that I'm posting this, February 1st, and that is Finlay, Donovan, Knox and Dead by Elle Cosimano, and this is the sequel to Finlay, Donovan is Killing It, which was so popular last year, and it was so loved, and I understand why. And if you like the show Dead to Me on Netflix, you have to read this series. And I thought that the second book was very similar to the first one. If you like the first one, I think you're gonna like this one. Very similar vibes, but I wish we had more character growth. So in this sequel, it is following Finlay and her best friend Vero again, and I love their friendship. It's one of my favorite things about the series. And Finlay discovers that online there is a forum where somebody's looking to hire somebody to murder Finlay's ex-husband, who is not a great man, but he's a good dad, and she wants to protect her children, so she is on a mission to find out who's trying to hire somebody to kill her ex-husband, and it all kind of unravels from there. But Finlay can be such a frustrating character for me, and I just wish we had some more growth. And I feel like at the end of the second book we're just where we were at the end of the first. But I think this might be a long series. We are set up for a third one for sure. They haven't announced it, but you could tell in the way that it ended that we are going to get one, and it is an interesting setup. So I did enjoy it. It just wasn't as funny as the first one, but I thought that it did capture a lot of the essence of the first one, and I think people are going to be so happy with it. Then the next book I read is the one that is a contender for my favorite book of the year. I just have a feeling that this one is going to be hard to top. And I knew that when I bought this was going to be a favorite, and that is why I put it off for so long. And this is Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulley, and this was so many people's favorite book of 2021. I completely understand why. I'm so glad that I was pushed to finally pick this up. I just adored it, and it was nothing like I expected it to be. You read the premise, but you really don't get a sense of what it's truly about until you read it. It's so powerful. I loved the conversations of grief in here. And I learned a lot about the Ojibwe traditions and what they believe happens after somebody passes away. I thought that was really moving and interesting. And it is set in Sioux, Michigan, and I live in Northern Ontario, which is very close. I am close to Sault Ste. Marie in Ontario, and they talk about that quite a bit in here, so I understand some of the culture around here, why hockey is so important to them. And I really love Donis. I think she is one of my favorite characters of all time. She felt truly authentic. She felt like a teenager. This is a YA contemporary and mystery kind of thriller thing, and it just is beautiful. But it does get a little convoluted at the end, but I thought it was well handled, and I really liked the way that Angeline Boulley wrapped this up. And once again, this is a debut. I love a good debut, and I'm so thrilled that I finally read this. And I think if it's been on your radar at all, you have to give it a try, because don't put it off like I did. I just loved it. Then I read the one that I would say is my biggest disappointment, but I still think a lot of people are going to love this, and this is The Christie Affair by Nina de Gramont, and this was a arc that was sent to me by St. Martin's Press, so thank you so much to them. And this is sort of a historical fiction novel that is based on the 11 days that Agatha Christie went missing, and that really did happen. She did go missing for 11 days after she found out that her husband was having an affair, and that is what happens in here. But I would say that's the only part of this that is rooted in truth. The narrator of this book is her husband's mistress, but it's not actually her husband's mistress, not the real person. This is a made-up character with a different name and a different story than the actual mistress that her husband had. And so we're getting the mistress's perspective, her motivations, what she's imagining Agatha Christie is doing during those 11 days. So, like, there's some interesting things in here. I liked the writing. I liked the period of time that it was told in. I thought that was interesting, but it was just hard. I had to wrap my head around it. That's so much of this is fiction. And I think if you go into it with the right mindset, knowing that, you may appreciate this more than I did. Then I read my first book for the 12 Challenge, and it's actually a graphic novel that I adored. This is The Girl from the Sea by Knox Ostertag, and they wrote this graphic novel and did the illustrations, and she is so incredibly talented. Look at these. I just wanted to show you some of the illustrations because they're so well done, and just something about them is calming and just so readable. And this is actually set in Nova Scotia, which is amazing, and it is a bit of a romance between these two characters. One is just a teenage girl, and the other is kind of a sea creature. I don't know how to explain it. You kind of discover it throughout the book, and they just have a sweet summer romance. I love the ending. It was so bittersweet. I didn't expect to be so moved by this one, and yeah, I just highly recommend this. If it's been on your radar at all, please give it a try. If you want to get into graphic novels, I think this is a good place to start. And I know that this author also did The Witch Boy. Is that what it's called? That is one that I want to read as well, because this was so good, and I'm glad that somebody recommended it to me for the 12 Challenge, because I don't know that I would ever have gotten to it on my own. One of my goals for this year was to read more nonfiction, so I did do that this month, and the first one that I actually listened to an audiobook was the Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. I don't think I would have picked this up on my own, but so many people loved it and were surprised by how much they loved it. I used to love John Green. I haven't read his stuff in ages, but I was kind of conflicted on whether this is something I wanted to pick up. But Libro.fm did send me a ALC when it first came out, and I finally got around to it, and I highly recommend listening to it, because John Green is the narrator, and it does feel like you're listening to a podcast, which is fun. And I had no idea that I'd be so riveted by listening to John Green give star reviews to different things. He gives star reviews to, like, scented stickers, scratch and sniff stickers, and then the smallpox vaccine, so we get a whole range here. He does talk about the pandemic in it, and there's just something, I think this is one of those books that you have to read in the right moment, and it'll really be uplifting for you. So I am so glad that I got to that. So thanks to everybody who's been raving about that one, because it really is incredible. And then that led me onto a nonfiction kick, so I listened to another nonfiction, and that is Crying at H Mart by Michelle Zauner, and she also narrates the audiobook, so I recommend it. I love when authors narrate their own memoirs. And Michelle Zauner is the lead singer in the band Japanese Breakfast, which I'd never heard of before, but then I fell down a rabbit hole listening to their music. And this book talks about her mother's diagnosis with cancer and her ultimate passing, and then grief that she has through that, and how the death of her mother affected her relationship with her father. And then she also talks about just her relationship with her mother in general, and her relationship with her partner, And I really thought it was interesting how she talked about how she really turned to cooking for comfort, which is something she'd never done before. And Korean food plays a big role in this memoir and in her story and in her grief, because her mother was Korean and her father was white, and they lived in the US, so she didn't have a huge connection to her Korean side, but she does end up going to Korea quite a bit, and there's a lot of conversations about food, and it'll make you hungry. And I looked up all the different dishes, and it's incredible. And I looked up all her music. I was Googling Michelle Zauner constantly, and there's some interesting articles that have come out in interviews after this where she really dives into her relationship with her father that I think are worth reading. So this was a really popular memoir last year. I think it's probably one of the most popular memoirs of 2021, and it deserves it. I thought it was incredible. Then I read an arc that wasn't on my radar at all, but I'm so glad Double-A Canada sent this to me because I really did enjoy it. And this is Yinka, Where's Your Husband by Lizzie, Demola, Blackburn, and this is being compared to Bridget Jones' Diary, which normally don't like those kind of comparisons because it can be hard for a book to live up to something like that, but I do think that that is an apt comparison here. And this book follows Yinka, who is a British Nigerian, and she's facing a lot of pressure from her mom and her family to get married. Her younger sister's married and pregnant, and she is very much single and more into her career. And then her cousin is getting married, and she decides that she needs to have a boyfriend or a date to that wedding. And so we meet a lot of men that she considers, that she pretends to be dating, that are interested in her, that she's not interested in, and all those kind of things. And it's just a fun time. Yinka can be frustrating. She is kind of obtuse at moments and difficult to read about, but she really comes around. There's so much character growth in here. I love the conversations about therapy. I don't think I've read many books where actual therapy is involved. You see a therapy session. I just thought this was incredible, and I think people are gonna have fun with this. Let me show you there. I love books that have mixed media throughout, and this does. So this has like her schedule, there are emails in here, text messages, and I just thought that added to the authenticity of it. It just felt real, and I think a lot of people will relate to Yinka. And yeah, I just thought this was really, really fun. It is not, I wouldn't say it's a romance. This is about this character finding her voice, finding what makes her happy, realizing that she has to work on herself internally. And it's just, I thought it was well done. I do think that this is a really relatable book, and if you loved Bridget Jones, I think this one will appeal to you, and you should give it a try, and I hope it gets the attention that it deserves. I am completing so many of the goals that I set out to do in 2022 already, and I finished my first series of the year. Well, it's a duology, but we're gonna count it. It counts, okay? But I finally read A Song for Storm and Silence, which is the sequel to a Wrath of Rains and Ruin. Is that what it's called? I have it right here. A Song of Race and Ruin, duh. And I loved that book. It's actually one of the books that got me back into YA fantasy when it first came out. I read that for an Instagram buddy read, and then I just never got to the sequel because I think the pub date was pushed back, and then it kind of just fell off my radar. But I'm so glad that I finally got to it. This is the biggest book I read this month. It's over 500 pages, but it didn't feel like it. I just loved to be back with these characters. And I know that so many people preferred the first book, but I actually think I liked this one more. And I think that is because, I thought about this for a while, but I think that is because I am such a character-driven reader. And this book is more about the characters. The first one is very plot-driven. A lot of interesting things happened. I adored it. But this one really focuses on the aftermath of the events of the first book and how the characters respond. And I thought it was wonderful. I loved the ending. I thought the ending was perfect. I think it's going to get mixed feelings about that. It's going to be a divisive ending, but I thought it was perfect for the story, and I was moved by it. I thought that there were some interesting conversations about grief in here as well. And yeah, I just loved it. I love these characters. I love their connection. I loved all the side characters and their eternal struggles. There were some interesting reveals in here as well. So yeah, I highly recommend that duology. I have discovered that I am a duology person. I love a good duology because I do feel like the middle book in a trilogy can feel like a filler, and that did not happen in this at all. And I think Roseanne A. Brown is working on some other stuff. I can't wait to see what she writes next because yeah, this was so good. Okay, 3 more. So my last nonfiction of the month. So I read 3 nonfictions this month, which is amazing, and this is Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, and this was compelling. Of course, it drags at some points. This is a very science-based book about the importance of sleep. And I think we all know that sleep is important, but this really drives that home. And I almost think if you are somebody who has struggles with sleep, have always been a good sleeper, so that's not an issue for me, but I know a lot of people struggle with sleep. And I almost think that this book could be difficult for you because it's really about why sleep is important more than how to fall asleep. So if you're not getting the sleep you need, this might be anxiety inducing. So I think I might wait on this one if you're one of those people, but it is really interesting. And I think it's important to read more studies on this topic. I've seen some criticism about some of his research, but I just thought it was interesting. I never thought I'd be interested in this topic, but I really did learn quite a bit. And yeah, I would just be cautious if you or somebody has insomnia or is not a good sleeper. I might skip this one for now until you get into a good place with your sleep, because I think it could be anxiety inducing for sure, but I enjoyed it. Then I read an e-arc of one of my most anticipated books of the year, and I loved it. I thought this was incredible, but I'm not going to universally recommend it. I think this is going to be a very divisive book. I don't think everybody's going to love this. And it is Extasia by Claire Legrand. And if you loved Sawkill Girls, I don't think that's a guarantee that you're going to love this. They are both YA horrors, but very, very different vibes. So Extasia is pretty much a cult. We are following our main character who at the beginning is nameless, so I don't want to say too much. But she deeply believes in the faith of this cult. These women are being told that they're the only people left in existence. The world that was, I believe that's what they call it, is no more. God chose these people to survive and continue and repopulate the world, and they have to follow a certain faith. Women become saints, but women were also the downfall of the world, so they're second-class citizens. It's very misogynistic, and it's difficult to read about because these women were tortured and beat up, but our main character deeply believes in all of this. And then the men in town are being murdered, and she discovers that there are witches on the outskirts of the town, and the power is called Extasia, and she is being called by the power to join these women, and she decides that she's going to use the power to save her village, and it all kind of unravels from there. And it's a lot, and it goes in interesting directions, and I just don't think it's going to be a book for everyone. So I highly recommend reading the first chapter or an excerpt online to see if you can connect with the writing, because it's even told in an interesting way. So it's one of those ones, like, I loved it, but I'm hesitant to recommend it to you. So definitely try out an excerpt first, and if you do read this, I would love to talk about it because I'm just so curious to see what everybody's gonna think. And then after reading Extasia, I needed a light book, so I listened to Rosaline Palmer Takes the Cake by Alexis Hall, who wrote Boyfriend Material, which I loved, and the sequel to that is coming out this year and I'm so excited about. But this was a fun one. Rosaline Palmer is our main character, and she is on a show that is pretty much Great British Bake Off. The format is the same. I think they call it Bake Expectations in the book, but the format's the same with the blind bake, and just the feel of it is so much Great British Bake Off. So if you love that, you're gonna love this. And we get some of the behind the scenes of what goes into the show. So there's a lot of talk about editing to make the storyline for the characters good and make the connections between the characters sweet, and you know the vibe that you get from watching the show. So I thought that was fun, and there's some interesting bakes in there, so lots of talks about cooking. But Rosaline Palmer is a single mother who is just looking for something for herself, to do something for herself. So she goes into this show, and she has no confidence at the beginning, so we really see her come into her own throughout. But there's some awful characters in here, and they're supposed to be awful, but again, I think if you're going into this one for the romance, you might be disappointed because it's such a slow burn, and I don't want to say too much, especially if you don't read the back of it. So yeah, there's some awful characters in here. That is all I will say. But it was fun to read about her connection with some of the other contestants. There's some real friendships formed on there. The food was fun. I loved all the baking. I really grew to love Roselyn by the end. I loved her daughter, and I loved her best friend, Lauren. And Roselyn is bisexual, so Lauren is actually her ex-girlfriend, and there's some interesting conversations about how bisexual women are treated in here as well. So I thought it was really well done. I think some people might be disappointed if they go into it looking for the romance part of it, because it's such a small part of it, and it can be so frustrating through the majority of it. If you read it, you know what I'm talking about. So yeah, I really am glad that I picked it up, and it was a perfect book to end the month and get me so excited for all the romances I want to read for February, the month of Valentine's Day. And I will talk more about the books that I want to read in February in my next video. So thank you so much for sticking around and listening to me ramble about all these books. It was such a great reading month, and I would love to know what your favorite book of January was. Mine was definitely Firekeeper's Daughter, but I read some real contenders in here, like The Girl from the Sea is up there. I just loved it. Psalm of Storms and Silence is up there. So like, I just read some really fun books this month, a good mix of genres, and I can't wait to see what February brings. I hope a lot of romance. So I will talk to you guys then. Bye for now.